This is a Parks Canada production. Ce balado est aussi disponible en français.
There's a place tucked into the foothills of southern Alberta where the sky stretches wide and the grass grows tall, where generations of cowboys, cooks, and capitalists have left their mark. This is Bayou Ranch. Here, the prairies seem to stretch out endlessly, where thousands of Bayou cattle once grazed over 100,000 acres of prime, rough fescue grassland.
The grass at the Bayou is the secret to success of the cattle and the buffalo before them.
There were people in Eastern Canada that knew that all this grass had nobody eating it. So that's how the beef business came about, getting into the beef bonanza.
I'm Fred Shepard, and you're listening to ReCollections, Grass into Money. Parks Canada is known worldwide as a leader in nature conservation, but we do much more than that. Together with our partners, we commemorate the people, places, and events that have shaped the place we now call Canada. Join us to meet experts from across the country as we explore the sites, stories, and artifacts that bring history to life. We're standing on a rise overlooking the headquarters of Bayou Ranch National Historic Site, a dozen kilometers or so outside of Longview, Alberta, in Treaty 7 territory. It's a jaw-dropping scene. Dozens of red wooden buildings with white trim catch the eye, vibrant against the brilliant blue of the prairie sky, broken only by the jagged snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains towering over the foothills and grasslands of southern Alberta.
So as you come out of the visitor center, you have this gorgeous view of the Rocky Mountains, which can really distract you quite a bit. But as you look towards the mountains, you're looking down almost the street of a village.
Tucked into a small valley carved out by the cool waters of Pekisco Creek, this group of buildings was once the heart of operations for the massive ranch. There's no mistaking where we are. The distinctive Bayou brand is emblazoned upon the roof of the workhorse barn. Fittingly, it features a letter U with a line over the top.
The special thing about the Bayou is that there's not a single building there that has been brought down from somewhere else.
There are barns to house and feed horses, bulls, dairy cows, poultry and pigs, a blacksmith shop, a bunkhouse with a garden and root cellar, a slaughterhouse, and a post office. At one time, this was one of the biggest population centers in southwest Alberta. People gathered here to collect their mail, sell some eggs and butter, talk business, and hear the latest gossip. Today, people gather here for different reasons. It's one of the few places in Canada where visitors can experience a slice of life from the ranching industry that once dominated this landscape, as well as other parts of the western provinces.
Pretty fine morning for this.
We're on a horse-drawn wagon tour with teamster Ross Fritz. He's been doing this for a while now.
I just completed my 20th year here, 20th season. It's been a pretty nice ride here. Whoa, stand still. I usually off by welcoming people to the famous Bayou Ranch National Historic Site here of Canada. It was one of the longest running, most successful of all the corporate ranches. And it continued as a large corporate ranch until 1950.
A corporate ranch is a business model where the ownership and profits, or losses, lay with the business and shareholders. The Bayou first began operations almost a century and a half ago.
For my money, you couldn't have picked a better spot.
So the area of the foothills where the Bayou sits, it's in a valley. I imagine that it was chosen by the indigenous before to get out of the wind. The wind is very hard on things.
That's historical carpenter Patrick Davis, who's been working here for the past 15 years.
My family has 5 generations that has either worked at the Bayou or did business with the Bayou. And my son started with parks this year to be the 5th generation. The mule deer and the white-tailed deer find the bayou just the perfect place to get out of the wind, to get away from coyotes. You've got clean, crisp, cool water with the Pekisko. There's 28-inch rainbow trout in the creek. We have fox galore all over the site, taking care of the mice for us. And black bear like to wander through the site. And in the past few years, we've had more grizzlies come through the site.
The animals at Bayou set this place apart from many other historic sites.
Nothing connects Canadians like animals, so I brought a couple of my laying hens, built a little chicken house for them that we move every couple days onto new fresh grass. The kids will sit there and pull grass and feed chickens for hours while their parents are touring the bayou. The public can come and see turkeys and pigs, and we usually have a baby calf. For some reason or another, the mama couldn't raise it. So in years previous, we've gotten some powdered milk, take it over to Roundup camp, put it over the fire, warm it up, and then a lucky kid or two can take a bottle and feed a baby calf.
Here's Claire Thompson, a Parks Canada historian.
It is becoming more difficult and more rare for heritage sites to be able to provide people with opportunities to interact with animals. I think that's becoming less and less of a reality for a lot of people, that they don't get a chance to interact with the kinds of, livestock that we used to take for granted, just even a couple generations ago.
In today's episode, we'll trace the history of 3 animals, bison, cattle, and horses, who've all left their hoof marks upon the natural landscape, shaping this place and the people who've lived and worked here. Up first, the plains bison. Scientific name, bison, also known as buffalo, or in the local Blackfoot language, inni. The plains bison is a massive animal with a shaggy dark brown coat, distinctive curved horns, and humped shoulders. Weighing in at over 800 kilograms and standing almost 2 meters tall, it's North America's largest land mammal. Long before cattle were introduced, bison were the most influential grazer in this region.
Massive part of the story of the bayou was these beautiful big bison animals eating the native grass.
For thousands of years, indigenous peoples of the prairie grasslands have employed ingenious methods to hunt these huge animals. Bison were a source of food, construction materials, tools, clothing, and stories. The bison population was immense. As author and Parks Canada interpreter Lauren Markowitz puts it in her book, Like Distant Thunder, Canada's Bison Conservation Story.
For thousands of years, bison flourished in staggeringly large numbers, perhaps 30 million bison across North America. Sightings of herds numbering over 10,000 and even 100,000 were commonly described well into the 19th century.
Bison were drawn to the rough fescue, a perennial bunch grass that flourishes in the coarse, mineral-rich soil of the Rocky Mountain foothills.
People will refer to it as prairie wool.
That's Parks Canada historian Meg Stanley.
It's very well adapted to seasons of good moisture and seasons of poor moisture.
Rough fescue is dense and stiff. It grows in bunches up to 1.5 meters tall. And, like its name suggests, fescue is rough to the touch. It's also tough. Shade-tolerant, drought-tolerant, and disease-resistant.
The rough fescue carried this whole country for many, many years.
The roots can grow as deep as 3 meters into the ground in search of moisture.
Those roots go down quite a ways.
Most grasses, when winter comes, takes all of its energy and throws it into the roots. Fescue grass throws a lot of the protein up top for the animals to use throughout the winter. And fescue grass can be as high as 5 to 8% protein, so that's how the animals survived on the eastern slopes of the foothills. That and the Chinook winds.
The Chinook is a warm wind that blows down off the Rocky Mountains. In winter, it can lead to major temperature jumps in a short period of time.
The Chinook winds would clear the snow off for the animals to eat.
The bison and the grass were symbiotic. In the vast prairie landscape, they co-evolved. with fescue grass providing year-round nutrients for the bison, and the grazing bison giving back to the soil in the form of nutrients from dung and urine. Bison wallows, depressions in the ground where they'd roll around in the dirt, also help preserve precious rainwater in the dry environment. And they grazed a lot. Adult bison eat up to 11 kilograms of grass every day. For indigenous peoples of the prairies, bison were essential for survival.
The people who were living here for millennia really relied on bison for their livelihoods.
We spoke with Dr. Mike Bruised-Head about the importance of the bison. He's a lecturer at the University of Lethbridge and an elder from the Kainai Nation, one of the nations that makes up the Blackfoot Confederacy.
My Blackfoot name is Chief Bird. This is all buffalo country. Blackfoot, buffalo, side by side. If it wasn't the enormous numbers of near the buffalo, we wouldn't be here. And we honored the buffalo so much, we have societies, the buffalo songs, the buffalo spirit that came to them. We embodied the buffalo spirit through our song and ceremonies and paint. You can't get any closer than that.
There's another place not far from the Bayou Ranch where this relationship has played out for millennia. The Women's Buffalo Jump National Historic Site near Cayley, Alberta.
Scott, Women's Buffalo Jump. That's an ancient site.
For roughly 2,000 years, people used this buffalo jump to hunt bison by stampeding them over a small cliff.
There's a whole story why the women had their own buffalo jump. It goes way, way back.
That traditional Blackfoot story describes the women's buffalo jump as the location of the first marriages between men and women.
And that's how they met, through that buffalo jump.
The full story is beyond what we have time for in this episode, but we've added a link in the show notes to a video from the Siksika Nation with the story and some great imagery from the women's buffalo jump.
The women were the buffalo runners.
Buffalo runners were the brave people who ran behind a herd of bison, chasing them off a rocky cliff. At the bottom of the cliff were others armed with bows and arrows.
I find that pretty amazing. Outgoing, physical women, heck, they probably shoot pretty good too. They didn't count on the men.
Archaeologists have found thousands of bison bones and bone tools, along with pottery and stone projectile points at the women's buffalo jump. Similar artifacts have also been unearthed at the Bayou.
We'll find the same kinds of projectile points here, the same kinds of lithic materials being used here.
This is Jessica Hill.
I'm one of the terrestrial archaeologists working out of the Calgary office for Parks Canada.
Jessica showed us around a different part of the Bayou Ranch, where landscape changes like flooding have provided an opportunity for archaeology work.
2005 was a really bad flood year here at the Bayou, and the creek actually changed its course and really started cutting into this terrace. And then we started to see lots of artifacts, bison skulls, like hearths, boiling pits, all eroding out. The indigenous people who were living in this area were coming back to this spot again and again to camp, to process bison. Maybe they're trapping animals on these low terraces. They're probably kind of boggy, and getting animals entrapped there and then processing them in this camp. Yeah.
But starting in the mid-19th century, as European settlers began moving to the prairies, bison populations declined sharply.
There was several different factors that played into the decline of the bison.
Here are a few of the most likely factors. Overhunting, enabled by rifles, horses, and high demand for bison hides and meat. Farms and railways encroaching on bison habitat. Widespread drought, competition from horses and later cattle, who also ate the fescue grass. Plus, introduced cattle also brought new, infectious diseases to the bison population. Also,
we do have this sport hunting and the eradication actually that government officials in the US were advocating for as a way to subdue indigenous people in the US, but that also had wide-ranging effects for people what is now Canada.
In just a few decades, the bison population was pushed to the brink of extinction, from tens of millions to less than 1,000 individuals across all of North America. Indigenous life on the prairies, once centered around the bison, became very challenging.
within people's lifetime, they could see the decline and knew that things were changing for the worse very fast.
Part 2, cows. Latin name, Bos taurus. Probably first domesticated by humans over 10,000 years ago from their ancestors, the huge and now extinct aurochs that once roamed the plains of Eurasia. As the tragedy of the bison decline played out, the settler population of the West continued to grow, and so did the grass. The ecosystem that co-evolved with bison turned out to be ideal for a profitable new grazer introduced to North America 4 centuries earlier, cattle. Here's Coralie Keller, an interpreter at Barrieux.
All this grass had nobody eating it. So that's how the beef business came about, getting into the beef bonanza.
In the 1870s and 80s, ranches south of the border, in places like Montana and Texas, were earning big profits for shareholders, and Eastern businessmen hoped to kickstart a similar industry in Canada. The Canadian government, for their part, wanted to see the prairie landscapes developed, and in the early 1880s began leasing out large tracts of ranch land for an annual fee of just a penny an acre.
The federal government needed a plan to settle the West, so they gave away cheap leases for these big ranches to come.
Certainly an early inflow of capital that creates a form of a boom, right? Because the leases are very inexpensive. And so people see that as an opportunity to get into this business.
One group of cattle industry insiders from Quebec jumped at the chance to secure a lease for ranch land in the Rocky Mountain foothills. Among them was veteran rancher and businessman Fred Stimpson.
He had a brother-in-law that was in the Northwest Mounted Police, and he had told him about all this great ranching country, the grass right up, halfway up a horse's belly, and no cattle there, and the buffalo were all gone.
Stimpson was already exporting beef across the Atlantic from his ranch in Compton County, Quebec, and had the business and political connections to expand his enterprise. With financial backing from the Allen family, major players in the shipping industry, Stimpson and his associates set out in the spring of 1881 for the nearly month-long journey westward to claim land for a new ranching operation.
The way they had to travel was by train through Bismarck, North Dakota, and then come up the Missouri River by steamboat to Fort Benton, Montana.
From there, they traveled another 500 kilometers on horseback.
That was the quickest way to get here. So that was quite some journey, all right.
Stimpson and his partners applied to lease thousands of acres of foothills grassland, and the Northwest Cattle Company was born. Fred Stimpson was the resident manager. There was only one thing missing: cows. In the spring of 1882, Fred Stimpson, along with business partner George Emerson and foreman Tom Lynch, traveled to southern Idaho to purchase a herd. They bought over 3,000 cattle for $20 each. Tom Lynch was tasked with hiring a capable crew to wrangle the herd back up to Canada.
So he was out looking for cowboys, and so he asked the trail boss of one of the herds there, and he said, well, you got to hire this Bill Moody, and his partner is John Ware.
That's the legendary black cowboy John Ware, who was designated a person of national historic significance in 2022. We'll hear more about him later.
Anyway, he hired them, and he gathered up a crew of about 12 cowboys, and they started bringing that herd up north here. And they left there in late May.
3,000 cattle on a journey of over 1,000 kilometers involving river crossings, an autumn blizzard, and traversing at least one high mountain pass.
Pretty long camping trip.
On arrival, the cattle were set to pasture, fattening up on the protein-rich fescue grass, much like the bison before them. The era of corporate ranching at the Barrieux Ranch, of turning grass into money for investors, had begun.
Grass into money is a phrase that gets used to explain the basics of ranching. To turn grass into money, you need cattle and you need a ranch. You need access to land where you can run those cattle. You need all the skills and talents of the people who know how to manage cattle.
There were many markets eager to get their hands on beef cattle, some nearby, some really far away.
In the 1880s, the first market is Indigenous communities because the bison are gone and people are starving. And then there's the market in the UK where, you've had huge industrialization and also a high value placed on protein-rich diets.
In the days before modern freezer technology, live cattle were shipped to the United Kingdom, first by train to eastern Canada and then by cargo ship across the Atlantic Ocean. Not coincidentally, the Allen family, major investors in the Bayou, were also shipping magnates.
And then after that, the American market, you need markets and transportation and all of the pieces that have to come together to go from having the basic resource, the grass, the land, the cattle, to having a sale at the end of the day.
After 20 years in operation, a new chapter for the Bayou began in 1902. One of the main investors, Andrew Allen, had recently passed away, and his heirs didn't seem to share the same interest in the ranching business. Cattleman George Lane, who had once worked as foreman at the Bayou Ranch, sensed an opportunity. Lane traveled to Montreal after making financial deals with partners in Winnipeg and offered $220,000 to take the ranch off their hands. The resulting sale, one of the largest in the Canadian West to that date, included owned and leased land, plus about 8,000 head of cattle, 500 horses, 1,000 tons of hay, plus all the buildings and fences that made life on the ranch possible. Stimson was unimpressed with the deal, saying that the ranch was worth far more and had been given away to Lane. But by that point, the Northwest Cattle Company was done, and so was Stimson's time at the helm. He briefly moved back to Montreal before running a dairy operation in Mexico City. Lane was described variously as a picturesque figure, considerably over 6 feet tall, with brilliant blue penetrating eyes, and also as a double-barreled back-action high-pressure electrical dynamo at full speed. During his ownership, George Lane increased the cattle herd to 40,000, making it one of the largest ranches in Western Canada, earning him the nickname the Cattle King of Alberta. But enough about the wheelings and dealings of the capitalists at the top of the operation. Let's shift focus to the people paid to get their hands dirty running this huge enterprise. A quick note. Up to this point, we've told this story roughly in chronological order. To discuss life and work on the ranch, we're going to have to generalize a little, which involves a bit of jumping around in time. Caring for and transporting 40,000 cattle around a huge tract of grassland was a major undertaking. Skilled labor on the ground was key to the whole operation.
That beautiful fescue grass kept the cows going. And then employees came, then they went to start a new life. Came from out east, and then they bought a quarter or moved to town, and that's how this whole West got settled, right?
Here's archaeologist Jessica Hill again.
Archaeology has interesting stories to tell about the history or the historic occupations here. We have some really neat artifacts from the cookhouse that talk about the Euro-Canadians, Chinese Canadians, Black Canadians who lived here.
Census records show that the kitchen staff at the Bayou and many other corporate ranches were often Chinese immigrants. One, a cook known around the Bayou as Hop Sing, probably a nickname, worked during the Lane era and stayed on for many years. He had at least one helper. Their days were extremely busy. Not only did they prepare 3 meals a day for 12 to 25 hungry workers, depending on the season, they had to clean everything up afterwards, look after the chickens, and draw water from an outside pump. Kitchen staff also planted, maintained, harvested, and preserved produce from the garden near the cookhouse. Vegetables like carrots and potatoes were kept fresh in sand in a root cellar and underground cold storage. Other produce was preserved by pickling or canning for the freezing winter months. Every 2 weeks or so, a steer was butchered to provide fresh meat for the staff meals. Close to the cookhouse was the building that housed the Pekisco Post Office, which operated at the Bayou from 1886 until 1927. It was a vital community hub, not only for the ranch itself, but also for families living nearby.
To come get the mail was kind of a community affair.
No doubt a lot of discussions on how to survive the area went on at the Bayou. Even the corporate ranch was still learning, so they wanted to know what worked and what didn't. Guys would meet at the Bayou and say, hey, did you have any luck with that type of oats? No, none. So discussing what worked and what didn't with neighbors at the Bayou helped the area thrive, right?
The Bayou was also a customer for local farmers.
My great-grandparents would sell a dozen eggs to a neighbor for 25 cents, but to the Bayou, they'd get a little extra. They'd get 50 cents. They'd sell butter to a neighbor for 50 cents a pound. To the Bayou, they got $1. So it was a definite economic driver.
While the overwhelming majority of workers at the Bayou were men, a small number of families called the ranch home. Anne Clifford, for example, wrote a memoir about her life as the wife of the cow boss in the 1930s and 40s. She recalled working as the Bayou's bookkeeper, a busy job that involved keeping track of the timesheets and payroll for more than 30 employees, as well as recording all of the buying and selling of livestock.
People think of ranching in relationship to cowboys, but throughout the history of the Bayou, there have been women working on the site and living on the site, raising families on the site, which is work in itself. The wives of the foreman and so forth also participated in managing what we would think of as the household economy. So we know, for example, that Fred Stimpson, his home was taken care of by his unmarried sister, which is quite a classic story of the 19th century.
For the children living at the ranch, it wasn't all fun and games. The Bayou was far from the nearest town, so at least one family hired governesses to help the children keep up with their schooling. The turnover rate, though, was quite high. At least 3 of the young governesses moved away after marrying other ranch employees.
So you see areas that are used specifically for families, specifically for sustaining the horses, specifically for living, day-to-day living. You know, you start to see ways in which different areas were used at different times of year and through this life cycle of the cattle as well.
That life cycle dictated everything at the Bayou and had a major influence on the day-to-day labors of the ranch hands, also known as cowboys. They were crucial to the whole cattle operation. Let's take a closer look at what each season of their work involved. Springtime, a time of new beginnings. As the snow on the pasture thaws, calves are born, roughly 9 months after the bulls were released from their isolation pens to spend a short time socializing with the cows.
Calving time on a ranch, I'll tell you, is pretty much most important times of the year.
My favorite season at the Bayou is spring, when the baby calves are coming. It takes about 2-3 days for them to get their feet underneath of them. And then all of a sudden their tails are curled up at their back and they're going across the pasture at 100 miles an hour because they've got that mama's milk in their belly and they're feeling good.
Ranch hands saddle up their horses and ride out to the pastures to brand the new calves. In the 1920s and 30s, there were 16 to 1,800 Bayou calves born each year, so this was a big task. Using a lasso, they roped the calves to the ground. Some ranch hands got really good at it, going on to compete at rodeos like the Calgary Stampede. In 1923, the fastest time in the calf roping competition went to Jonas Ryder from the Stoney Nakoda Nation, who worked as a ranch hand at the Bayou.
Jonas Ryder was known as one of the greatest ropers of all times.
The Calgary Stampede has been designated as a National Historic Event, recognized as one of the world's largest and best-known rodeos. Events like steer wrestling and chuck wagon racing originated with the daily work of ranch hands. In fact, George Lane and the next owner of the Bayou, Patrick Burns, were among the initial backers of the first Stampede in 1912. Back on the ranch, once the calves have been roped to the ground, the ranch hands apply a hot iron, leaving a permanent Bayou brand marking, making it easier to identify the owners. Summer. The calves, along with their mothers, spend their time munching rough fescue in the pastures. It's an all-you-can-eat grassland buffet. The bulls are kept separate to avoid any unplanned calving. As the snow melts in the higher elevations, more grazing land becomes accessible. Hay is harvested and bundled for winter feed. During their downtime, some ranch hands practice with the Paquisco Polo Club on the pitch at the Bayou. In 1909, the team rode to victory over other Western Canadian teams to win the Earl of Winterton Cup. Autumn is roundup time. Much of the ranch operation goes mobile, with the cooks setting up remote camps centered around a chuck wagon.
It's a cookhouse on wheels, and it goes where the stomachs are.
From the roundup camps, ranch hands venture far into the foothills, riding around the vast grassland in search of cattle with the Bayou branding. Definitely best to avoid taking any of the neighbors' herd, especially after 1919, when the adjacent EP Ranch was owned by Edward, the Prince of Wales.
So you got to gather them all up basically into a big circle and go in there and find your brand and then sort them out. And Bayou cows on this side, EP cows on that side. But yeah, getting the pairs sorted from thousands and thousands ahead, it would have been quite a sight to see.
Cattle that are ready for sale are sent to market by train, and the calves are moved to a calf camp for the winter. The rest of the herd is moved to winter pastures. As the cold sets in, their diet is augmented with hay collected earlier in the year. During the relatively quiet winter months, preparations are made for the next season. Some employees leave to take other jobs. Those who stay keep busy with maintenance tasks like repairs on the buildings around the headquarters. In 1882, a formerly enslaved man named John Ware arrived in the Alberta foothills.
Over the years, there's been a great number of really fine cowboys that have came and gone here. Some of them more famous than others for different reasons, but probably one of the most notable ones is a cowboy by the name of John Ware.
Little is known about his early life in the southern United States, but we do know that the highly skilled cowboy was hired in Idaho as part of the crew herding the original 3,000 cattle to what would become the Bayou Ranch. Ware stayed on as a ranch hand for 2 years before leaving for work elsewhere. He eventually purchased livestock and started his own ranch. Famous in southern Alberta during his lifetime, stories of John Ware's horsemanship, neighborly kindness, and strength have secured his place as a Western Canadian folk hero. Here's one story about an incident at the Bayou in the earliest days of the ranch that's taken on near legendary status.
The story of John Ware saving the cattle, I have no doubt is true.
During a blizzard, some of the cows took off.
When a storm blows in, whether it takes an hour or 2 days to blow in, the cattle will walk away from that storm. And if there's no fences or no tree line, they will just continue to walk and keep their butts to the storm. The cattle, they just kept going because the storm kept blowing in, cattle kept going and got miles and miles and miles away from the ranch.
And the cowboys that were all working together, they're like, there's nothing we can do. We're going to freeze to death. So let's just, hunker down and wait for the storm to pass.
But John Ware, he stayed with the herd. I'm not sure how many days it would have taken, probably 2, 3, 4 days, 5 days. And they ended up in the river bottom, and that's where John got control of them there and held them up there, because that was a good place to keep the cattle. They were out of the wind. There was buckbrush and willow brush there for them to eat. And it was several days later before the foreman and the rest of the crew located them. Just top cattlemen.
In 2022, the Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada designated John Ware as a person of national historic significance. The bronze plaque commemorating him can be found at the Saddle Horse Barn at the Bayou. It notes, John Ware achieved success in a white-dominated industry largely controlled by well-financed corporations, forging a successful ranching career despite racism, rough frontier conditions, and having been enslaved.
So my entire time working at the Bayou Ranch, I have looked for signs of John Ware being there. I feel very, very lucky to be working on the windows of the Saddle Horse Barn because John Ware looked out those windows once upon a time.
I've always said here, many times over the years, I wish them old barns could talk. I used to love coming here early in the morning. First thing I'd do, I'd open up the door in them barns and go walking through there. I'm not sure if I was listening for something or just thinking of all the great cowboys and great people that had passed through those barns.
Part 3. The horse, Equus caballos.
There's this really strong tradition still of horses being used in ranching, especially like in landscapes where vehicles aren't great for getting around, or if you have to follow another four-legged animal through some pretty rough terrain, a horse is often the best tool to do that in a lot of ways, and the safest too.
There were, and still are, two main types of horses at the Barrieux. Saddle horses, also known as light horses, are the trusty steeds ridden by ranch hands to cover vast distances of foothills grasslands.
You can rope off of them, ride miles and miles and miles with them, and that's how they move the cows.
Workhorses, or draft horses, are much larger and are usually harnessed up to plow fields or pull wagons. In 1890, the Barrieux had 800 horses, which may seem like a lot, but during the roundup, each ranch hand was assigned a dozen or more saddle horses. The workdays were so long that they would use horses in rotation, riding one until it was exhausted, then switching over to a new one. New developments on the prairies around the turn of the century meant new opportunities for businessmen with foresight and an interest in horses.
The earlier land leases for cattle operations were getting canceled, and the government was surveying all the land and cutting it up into smaller parcels to get more settlers, more people, more farmers.
The new farmers, as part of their homestead agreement with the federal government, needed to plow the fertile prairie grassland into fields for new crops. In the early 1900s, before modern farm machinery, a strong workhorse was the best tool for the job, so much so that it became the standard of measuring horsepower.
George Lane was very canny. He diversified.
So George seen all this coming, and he loved these big Percheron horses.
This led to a new revenue stream for the Barrieux, breeding and selling Percheron workhorses.
They came from La Perche, France. Big working solid horses for plowing up the land, for hauling coal, for hauling lumber.
They were also useful for construction projects like digging irrigation ditches and building dams. The Barrieux became one of the larger Percheron breeding operations globally. At its peak in 1916, the ranch had 700 registered Percherons. They were also highly regarded. The ranch won numerous awards from horse exhibitions. One writer claimed they'd won enough trophies to stock a galleon. Some are still here today, spending their days between the corral and the workhorse barn, or touring around the National Historic Site pulling a wagon with bench seating for up to 20 visitors. It's a memorable activity, and not just for guests.
I just loved working with these big Percheron horses. I grew up with them. Just been a real great pleasure getting a new team in and training them, and getting them so that they're trustworthy on the site.
Most of the large ranches that opened up during the cattle boom of the 1880s went bust within the next couple of decades. But the Barrieux managed to survive through bankruptcies, fires, and blizzards, initially as a corporate ranch and, from the 1950s onwards, as a family operation. Parks Canada entered the picture in the 1960s.
The Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada in 1968 identified ranching as something that they wanted to commemorate as an industry of national historic significance.
That commemoration included the ranching industries in parts of British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan.
And so that began rather epic tale of buying a ranch. So there was a lot of work put into identifying a ranch. And in fact, a series of ranches were identified in the 1970s, but none were successfully purchased.
Parks Canada evaluated more than a dozen ranches to determine the best place to interpret this history. This led to an unsuccessful attempt to buy the Barrieux Ranch in 1977. Negotiations restarted a decade later, this time with more success. Local ranchers and community members played a key role in the negotiations. At the time, the board described Barrieux as arguably the most important single ranch in Western Canada, with much of the best surviving in situ resources of any of the large ranches of the golden age of ranching. In 1991, Parks Canada purchased 367 acres of the Barrieux, including the headquarters area with 35 buildings constructed between the 1880s and the 1920s. Most were in fairly good condition because they were still actively used. Restoring and maintaining the buildings from the ravages of time and weather is a job that Patrick, as a heritage carpenter, continues to this day.
So historical restoration carpentry is a bit of a detective work, and you try to do your best to fix something without looking like it's been fixed. Most of these buildings were built by true craftsmen, whether they come from, most of them come from overseas. They've learned from generations overseas, and they come here and continued on with their skills. And that is a story in itself. We don't want to mess that story up. Everything at the Barrieux has been restored to exactly the way it was. For instance, you take a window, one corner is rotten. You only take out that rotten window. You try to match the identical wood grain. So a couple of the restoration projects that have been fantastic is the workhorse barn. This is a barn that was built in 1894. So the whole barn got picked up 2 years ago, moved off the foundation fixed, barn brought back.
The root cellar is another good example of a recent restoration project, rebuilt to how it would have looked prior to an unfortunate run-in with a horse. When it was originally constructed,
Some of the workers put their initials and the date in the masonry. It says, built September 5th, 1918.
Our understanding is that it collapsed sometime in the 1950s, and apparently it was a horse took the root cellar out. And the horse, named Rusty, spent about 5 days in the root cellar before he was found. That's the story.
And then by the time Parks Canada bought it, it was in pretty rough shape.
Parks Canada archaeologists partially excavated the root cellar, learning more about its original construction, layout, and use. They also found a pickling crock, sealing jars for canning, and beer bottles from a Calgary brewery, as well as jars still full of preserves like rhubarb in syrup and pickled asparagus. With this new information, restoration work on the root cellar began in 2015.
It had all caved in. So when we dug it out, the root cellar was lined with stone walls, and Charlie Miller carved his name in there. His brother, Fred Miller, I think he was there 50 years. My great-grandfather worked for him, for Fred Miller, which was kind of neat to find. On the interior, we were able to decipher where the logs standing up were, because wherever there was a log, they put two noble blades, two blades from it's a cultivating machine being pulled by horses, and then they would set the log on top of that and pour a little bit of concrete around that. So we knew exactly where every log on the interior was, and it turned out fantastic.
Visitors can now go inside the underground root cellar to see the original inscriptions and displays showing how cooks, like Hop Singh, use the space to preserve food for the hungry ranch workers. All this restoration work helps ensure the Barrieux is conserved for future generations of both humans and animals.
Unfortunately, we're feast or famine at the Barrieux. It's either drought or a lot of rain. In my time, 15 years, I have seen 300-year floods at the Barrieux and 1,000-year flood at the Barrieux.
That would be the 2013 floods that affected Calgary as well, the costliest natural disaster in Canadian history at the time. Pekisco Creek flooded the headquarters area, affecting most of the buildings.
When I first got there, the Percheron horses, these are 18-hand high, 2,000-pound horses, were standing in water up to their neck. We were able to get them out. The last 3 years have been some of the most devastating droughts that we've seen in our area ever. Climate change is absolutely real, and I've got to see it in my very short time at the Barrieux. We need to learn on the fly here, like we always have. We've been doing some flood mitigation We've planted a lot of trees wherever there was historically the cottonwoods. And so a lot of our trees have died from drought, but wherever they did stay, the roots were like rebar and they just held them banks together. Most of the buildings are built on the right side of the creek. There's a couple on the flood side of the creek that we've built up higher, removed the buildings, built a higher foundation. So hopefully that helps.
From a business perspective, a lot has changed since the earliest days of the Northwest Cattle Company. Marketing, cattle breeding and genetics, feeding, the logistics of getting beef to market, supply and demand economics, the list goes on. But while the outside world evolves at a rapid pace, the basics of beef production and the ranching way of life have been slower to change.
It's all about putting pounds on the beef, making new babies, looking after the grass. So the parallels to running cow herd at the Bayou today does not differ that much from 50 to 100 years ago. We are praying for moisture in the spring. We're praying for early grass so we can get the cows off of the bales that we put up the previous fall. We're putting up hay, taking care of the hayland, cutting it, baling it. And then in the winter, we're rolling bales out for the cows to eat. We're rolling straw out to keep the cows bedded. A bale underneath of a cow is worth as much as a bale in a cow, so we try to keep them warm.
One other thing that's consistent with the historical operations at the Bayou is cattle economics. Not only do the Bayou staff raise cattle on site each year, but with a little help from the nonprofit Friends of the Bayou, they also sell the beef at the end of each season. Only now, instead of going to investors and owners, the proceeds come back to the Bayou to help keep this very special place operational. Bayou Ranch National Historic Site is open to the public daily from mid-May to the end of September. It's 100 kilometers southwest of Calgary along Highway 22, the Cowboy Trail. In 2025, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of Parks Canada welcoming visitors to the ranch. Explore the 35 historic structures at the Bayou headquarters, including the blacksmith shop that's home to many original artifacts from the corporate ranching era. Tour the site aboard a horse-drawn wagon. Learn to rope a steer or saddle a horse from Parks Canada staff interpreters who bring the ranch to life. In August, you can watch teams of working cowboys compete for silver buckles and bragging rights at the old-time ranch rodeo. ReCollections is produced by Parks Canada. A big thank you to consulting producer Joseph Manyfingers, as well as Ross Fritz, Coralie Keller, Dr. Mike Brewsted, Dr. Claire Thompson, Patrick Davis, Lauren Markowitz, and Meg Stanley, who recently retired from Parks Canada after an amazing career sharing the history of Western Canada. For loads of extras, including a Google Arts and Culture exhibition with photos of the site and artifacts, plus resources about efforts to reintroduce bison to the prairies and the foothills, take a look at the show notes or visit parks.canada.ca/recollections. I'm your host, Fred Shepard. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the designation of many of Canada's national historic sites, people, and events began with a suggestion from the public? If you have a suggestion, check out the show notes or visit parks.canada.ca/commemorate for information on how to nominate a new event, person, or site that's important to the history of Canada.